Garden Basics with Farmer Fred is brought to you by Smart Pots, the original lightweight, long-lasting fabric plant container. It's made in the USA. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information and a special discount. That's smartpots.com/Fred. Welcome to the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast. If you're just a beginning gardener or you want good gardening information, well, you've come to the right spot. Go do an internet search of Electroculture Gardening. Go ahead. I'll wait. Well, you're back. Good. You may have noticed that there are pages and pages of websites talking about electroculture gardening. Basically, it involves putting a stick in your garden bed and then wrapping a copper wire around it, and then stand back and watch your garden explode in produce and flowers because of the electricity that has been harnessed and transferred to your soil near your plants. My opinion of that? Well, I will refer to Farmer Fred Garden Rule number 8, which is, if it works for you, fine, but keep an open mind. If you're using safe gardening techniques that others frown upon, and those techniques are working, well, who are we to tell you to stop? Still, new research, techniques, or equipment may make your chores a heck of a lot easier and satisfying. Today's solution could become tomorrow's problem, so be open to change. Keep an open mind. Now, one thing you might have noticed about all those web pages and TikTok videos about electroculture, it's gardeners conducting homemade experiments and recording their observations. Today, America's favorite retired college horticultural professor, Debbie Flower, has arrived, and she's armed with her 12-inch ruler, and she's looking to slap someone's knuckles. Why? Because most of these homegrown experiments about attracting electricity to the garden are not following the scientific method. What the heck is the scientific method? Welcome back to high school. If you're a gardener and you like to conduct experiments, you'll want to listen to what Debbie has to say. So get out your data books, prepare to take copious notes. It's all right here in episode number 285, Electroculture Gardening versus the Scientific Method. And by the way, speaking of experiments, we also talk about growing avocados in marginal climates. If you don't have avocado trees growing throughout your neighborhood, you probably live in a marginal climate. But again, who are we to stop you from trying? And we have tips for you to help you possibly luck out this time with growing an avocado tree. We're podcasting from Barking Dog Studios here in the beautiful Abutilon jungle in suburban Purgatory. It's the Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast, brought to you today by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. Let's go. We like to answer your garden questions here on the Garden Basics podcast. Debbie Flower is here, America's favorite retired college horticultural professor. Debbie, have you ever heard of electroculture?
Heard of it.
Yeah, a lot of people have heard of it. If you're on the internet, you've probably heard of it as well if you're a gardener. We get a letter, a question from Charlie in Brooklyn. As you know, he's part of a community garden there in Brooklyn. Always has questions.
Gardener, yeah.
Very active. And he forwards an email that the group got about an electroculture class being held there at the community garden in Brooklyn. And Charlie wants to know, hi, Fred, can you please tell me if this works? Charlie, do you have any easier questions? It's about electroculture. It's an electroculture class that's coming up, he says. Well, what is electroculture? To put it simply, it's that because the cells of plants, like your own plants, have electrical signals. And you can increase the plant's growing energy by capturing atmospheric electricity and directing it into the soil. And you've talked about that in the past, Debbie, here about all these chemical interactions going on in the soil. Really, it boils down to electricity.
Yes, or some similar energy fields like electricity.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Well, the term electroculture has surged on social media in recent months as growers with gardens large and small give electroculture a shot. A public Facebook group called Energetic Agriculture has more than 150,000 members. The search terms electroculture, electroculture gardening, and electroculture copper wire have been spiking on Google since early spring, as well as on TikTok, which has 97 million views of the subject. There's a lot of tutorials around with users demonstrating how to create antennas by wrapping copper wire around long wooden dowels or bamboo stakes. This according to the Washington Post. And there are plenty of before and after testimonials from gardeners who say that adding electroculture antennas make their plants flourish. This, as we were discussing before we started, is an old idea. It goes back to Ben Franklin, his kite, a key, and lightning.
Mm-hmm. It's hundreds of years old that people have been experimenting with electricity. I remember an experiment I read about where they were trying to figure out if a tree needed water based on electrical signals from the tree. That's sort of the opposite way of using electricity.
Experiments were conducted over the centuries. They sometimes are popular, sometimes they're not. And there's more experimentation and research going on now. Research in Europe and Asia has shown encouraging results, and electroculture advocates, as well as some scientists, are saying that harnessing electricity could revolutionize food production. There is research in Japan that's found by generating artificial lightning strikes near shiitake logs, almost doubling the size of and number of mushrooms that they produced. And then in China, scientists in 2018 conducted an experiment that involved applying pulses of positive voltage to crops, creating a 20 to 30% jump in yields. Well, if you go online and you start doing a little research on this Chinese study, newscientist.com says while the engineering is novel, the way the experiment was conducted means the researchers have limited biological data on the plants. They say it cannot lead them toward providing an explanation for increasing yield or cutting pesticides. There may be other explanations for why the peas exposed to an electrical field grew faster. The trial wasn't double-blinded. And you can explain that a little later, Debbie. So the technicians growing the plants knew which were in an electroculture, and that might add some bias to the results. Mm-hmm. Another concern with the new study is how overly confident they were that electroculture works. New Scientist says that the authors represented as fact that static electric fields promoted seed germination and plant growth, although that's highly debatable. The authors don't expand on current state of knowledge on this topic properly, and the basis for their hypothesis is rather poorly supported. So really nothing about electroculture is settled in fact to sort of answer your question, Charlie. And a 2018 systematic review of 19 studies on the subject found they all suffered from methodological flaws, which lowered credibility in the results. And there's a movie coming out. A filmmaker is going to release a documentary called Electroculture Life, featuring advocates of electroculture. And he's doing this as a crowdfunding campaign for the project. Already he's raised $40,000. And I understand that part of the movie is people showing their experiments to prove that it works. Well, we can't really say yay or nay about whether electricity is going to work or not as far as increasing the size of plants or getting seeds to germinate. But you, in your past, have helped students conduct experiments.
And I've conducted experiments on my own, and that is a very specific thing.
That's why I would like to just sort of dovetail off from electroculture and talk about how to do a home garden experiment if you want to do it using what's called the scientific method.
Right. The scientific method has some very specific steps to it. First is you observe something interesting. That this plant grew bigger than the others, or this one didn't get pests, but that one did. Something that has piqued your interest, something that's different. And then you ask a question. Why did this plant get bigger than the other? Why does this one have pests and that one doesn't? That would be your question. You create a hypothesis. That's your guess, an educated guess about what's going on. This plant grew bigger than that plant because... And then you come up with your why. I fertilized it differently, or the seed source was different, or whatever the reason you think that plant grew bigger than the other plant. And then you do the experiment to prove or disprove your hypothesis. The experiment has to have some very specific steps. You have to have a good sample size. I saw an example where there were 4 treatments and there were only 3 test subjects in the treatment. To me, that wasn't big enough, not to prove something. You have to have enough that test subjects in your experiment that other things like genetic differences in plants, for instance, would not be the reason for the variation. So in my example, I chose 4 treatments and 10 plants per treatment.
What were you trying to do?
Check whether growth was influenced by the concentration of fertilizer applied.
All right. So
pretty simple.
All right. And you're growing from seed or from plants?
Well, that is something to decide. Mm-hmm. You can do either, but you have to do all the plants the same. You have to have some controls in your experiment, some controlled, they're called controlled variables, that some things that are the same throughout. So let's say I started coleus from seed. The coleus cultivars all have to be the same. I don't want a pink coleus and a green coleus and one with a wrinkled leaf and one with lobed margins. They all have to be the same kind of coleus.
Coleus, of course, is a houseplant.
Coleus is a houseplant. It's very easy to start from seed. I want to use the same media in my case, 40 containers. I want all the containers to be exactly the same.
I would think you'd want all the soil to be the same, too.
Right. That would be my media, right? I want the source of water for all my watering to be from the same place. It's not like some get deionized water and some get distilled water and some get tap water and some get tap water from the house and some get tap water from the hose. It's all going to be from the same place. I'm going to use the same fertilizer. All I'm going to change is the concentration of that fertilizer. I'm going to water at the same frequency with fertilizer. I'm going to water, if I do additional watering without fertilizer, it's going to be at the same frequency and even amount. Applying the same amount. The growing conditions for all of my coleus from seed are going to be the same. The sun, the temperature, the wind, the light, the darkness, all the same. And going to have, as I said, 4 different treatments. So let's say one is, you always have to have a control, which is one that does not get any treatment at all. However, it gets, when the other plants are given a treatment, it gets something similar. So in this case, it would just get water. Plain water. So it's water without fertilizer. The fertilizer is the treatment I'm testing.
But the soil is the same. Soil's
the same. Containers the same. Seed source is the same. Growing conditions are the same. And ideally, I have set it up in a random. I have all my containers, but they're randomly dispersed. I don't have all my controls in one place and all my let's say my treatments are full concentration per the label on the fertilizer bag, half concentration from the label and quarter concentration. So I have 10 plants that are controls. They're never going to get fertilizer. 10 plants that are going to get 100% of what the label recommends. When it's applied, I'm going to get 10 plants that are going to get half as much as the label says to apply and 10 plants that get a quarter as much. But these plants are not in blocks. I don't have them all together per treatment. I have them mixed up. So maybe I put colored tags in them or something. I have them mixed up. So I'm applying the treatment. One container is over there and one's over there and one's behind me and one's down there.
Is this a definition of double blind?
Yes, except in double blind, you don't know the results. In this case, because we're applying it, we have to know what we're applying. So we would know, but it's randomization of the treatment. Maybe the location in the block of plants. So I have all 40 plants in one place, but maybe the ones on the edges are going to show different results than the ones in the middle. I don't want all my edges to be one treatment. So I have to mix up within the things I think I'm controlling, sun, wind, temperature, light, darkness. There may be variations in the location of where my pots are. So I have to mix up my treatments in that area.
Such as humidity. That could be a variable.
Yes, in plants for sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
The seed source, I would imagine, too, would have to be the same, too.
Yes, the seed source would have to be the same.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm going to set up my experiment. I'm going to execute it, meaning I'm going to grow them, water them, and let's say I have to have something I'm going to measure. That's going to be the data I collect.
All right. And that in this particular case would, I guess, be the germination, days to germination, and then the height of the plant.
Yeah, those sound like good things to measure. Okay. I could, if I wanted to really get technical, count the number of leaves, measure the size of the leaves, those sorts of things. Depends on what your goal is for the plant. Mm-hmm. But yes, I think time to germination and height over time would be good things to measure in this case. Or just one of them. You don't have to do both. Then at some point you're going to stop you're going to decide to run it either a period of time. Coleus are not cold hardy, so maybe you're just going to start in spring and run it until you get your first frost in the fall, and that will be the end of your experiment. Maybe you don't want to go that long. Maybe you're going to do it for 12 weeks. So you take measurements periodically, say weekly, your choice, and then keep track of that by treatment. And then you have to decide if the treatments actually had an effect. And that's done with statistics.
That's why you have a data book.
Yes. You keep the information written down. You might want to take the measurements at the same time of the day. Sometimes plants wilt in the afternoon, and that would make them shorter. So you might want to do it always at noon or always at whatever the time works for you, 7 p.m., whatever. As long as it's the same, you're measuring all the plants at the same time every time you measure the plants.
And speaking of the containers, they would all have to be the same. You just can't go around the yard and pick various size pots
Correct.
To do this in. So,
Correct.
And they, as you've often stressed when it comes to planting seeds, make sure they're in clean containers.
Yes. In my mind, I would have gone to the supply store and purchased probably number ones, black number ones. So they're clean. They've never been used before. They're all from the same plastic stock, supposedly. I'm trying to keep everything the same. These are your controlled variables. Variable meaning it could change. You could have different size containers. That ruins your experiment. So it's a controlled variable. I'm going to control that the pots are all the same. The media is all the same. The growing conditions are all the same. When I water is all the same. You can't just say, that guy's wilting over there, I have to water it. If you're going to water that one, you got to water everybody.
Nor can you extrapolate away from the coleus. You can't say,
correct.
Coleus popped up in 8 days. You're going to have great luck growing all houseplants this way.
Right.
You can't say that.
No, you can't. Or that coleus grew best with half-strength fertilizer applied weekly. That's great. Coleus maybe did. I don't know. I haven't done this experiment. But if that was your result, you can only say that about coleus. You can't say tomatoes are going to be that way or zinnias are going to be that way. You can only say it about coleus.
In the real world of research, one of the big steps is the communication of your results.
Yes. In the scientific method, you're not just doing it for your own information. You're doing it to inform others as well. Which
might be one of the reasons for this guy producing a movie, but a movie is not a peer-reviewed entity.
No, right. In order for it to be considered a scientific experiment, you have to submit it to what's called a peer-reviewed journal. Peers are people of your own ilk, and peer-reviewed journals, they assume you're a scientist, and so the people who will review your work are scientists also. And so they'll maybe have a coleus expert, a fertilizer expert, a statistics expert, some generalists out there who aren't experts but are horticulture professors or something, and they'll all read your experiment as you've written it, and they will have ways they want it written. You have to contact them and find that out, and they'll look at how you did it and what your results were, and if all that was kosher, meaning if all of that was done to their standards, to general scientific standards and their own specific standards, because they're reading it, then your article will be published and people can take it as good science. When you said some of those experiments had questionable results, that wasn't the word that you used, but the electroculture experiments were evaluated and shown not to be up to scientific standard.
Right.
And so they would not be printed in a peer-reviewed journal. So we don't know that electroculture really works until we see results in peer-reviewed journals. And the little bit I found that was in peer-reviewed journals was incredibly specific. A certain kind of seed for a certain kind of treatment, period.
And also in a peer-reviewed journal or any sort of report that you submit to a peer-reviewed journal, you have to state your financial interests.
Yes.
And if you have a financial interest in selling some sort of gizmo that creates a higher electrical field in the soil, you have to say that.
Yes, and it doesn't mean you'll be refused. Unfortunately, well, that's my point of view, maybe not yours. A lot of university research is now funded by the companies that want their product to be accepted. It's unfortunate because they obviously have an interest in the results of the experiment, but it's fortunate that somebody's funding the research. So it's a two-sided coin, but there is not enough independent money out there to do research on new products or new techniques that may be advantageous to agriculture or horticulture. So the companies who have scientists who have come up with potentially ways to take care of things want someone to collaborate their research, and will send money to universities that to be used to do those experiments.
Let's throw a bit more mud in this whole picture. Mm-hmm. There are some, shall we say, peer-reviewed journals out there that are basically pay for play. You pay the journal to have your report in that journal. Mm-hmm. I don't like that. No, if money's talking, it's not science. Right. Follow the money, as Woodward and Bernstein used to say.
And you find the bad stuff, and you don't find the honest stuff.
Yeah, it's amazing the amount of research that is passed off on the nightly news as in research today. Mm-hmm. That turns out to have very questionable starts, especially if you trace it back. And I remember one that was talking about the superiority of frozen foods versus canned foods. Mm-hmm. That was done at a university. But the head instructor who was conducting this experiment was also the vice president of public relations for, I think it was the frozen food industry.
Oh, my.
So,
yes.
They can push things one way or the other.
Yes.
Is that? So you really have to have an unbiased view of any sort of experiment that you're doing.
Yes, you do. And I when I did an experiment to get my master's degree, I was good at statistics then. Don't ask me to do them now, but I knew what I was looking at. I understood what it said. I knew how to do it. And I had a professor who was telling me the outliers didn't matter. Outliers being, let's say in one control group, you had 3 seeds that never germinated. Mm. Well, they're outliers. They never germinated. Don't consider them. Or you had 3 plants that got really huge. Even just one, where all the data for the rest of them was kind of close together. I disagree with that. Every plant in this group participated in this experiment, and their results count. So even within the scientific community, there are people who, as in everything, are a little tighter about the rules and a little looser about the rules.
Now you're making me feel bad because on my bike ride, I like to calculate the number of calories I burned on a bike ride. And I have 4 different sources for that information.
Oh, my.
I never said I traveled light. But they all give me a different calorie output number. To make it easy on the math in my head, I just toss out the high one, I toss out the low one, and figure the average of the 2 in the middle. Mm-hmm. No.
Whereas in science, in my estimation, you would take the average of all 4 of them.
Yeah, that's a lot of math.
Yep.
Okay. So I think what we're trying to say here, if you're going to conduct an experiment and have fun like that in the garden, why not?
Yeah.
If you've got that urge, get yourself a really expensive soil test kit, have fun, set up a chemistry counter.
Or things change color and bubble up and stuff.
Have fun. Just be sure to use the scientific method.
Right.
And remember, do not extrapolate. Just because something will help peas grow faster does not mean it'll help tomatoes grow faster.
Right. And if you don't use the scientific method, that's okay. You can still have fun and do stuff, but present your results with that caveat. That you didn't do it scientifically, it's called anecdotal. It's anecdotal information. In my garden, this happened, and that's an anecdote.
Right.
It's not science. It's not proven.
Well, that brings up another point, too, about conducting your own experiment. Should you repeat the experiment more than once?
That is a kind of a standard of science. It's not proven until you can do it. You've published, you've said what you can do, and someone else could take what you've done, do it again themselves, and have the same results.
But as far as the original experiment, should you repeat it?
You can, but you are a variable too.
True.
So you can, And if you get different results, that's very telling. If you get the same results, you're still going to want someone else to repeat it to prove it's science.
Science is hard, but can be fun. All right. So as you're experimenting electroculture, remember the scientific method. And as the cynical farmer Fred would say, follow the money.
Yeah.
And see if somebody's trying to sell you something or not. Well, there's your mind-boggling science for the day. Thank you, Debbie.
You're welcome, Fred.
I'm pretty picky about who I allow to advertise on this podcast. My criteria, though, is pretty simple. It has to be a product I like, a product I use, and a product I would buy again. And you know who checks all those boxes? It's Smart Pots. Smart Pots is the oldest and still the best of all the fabric plant containers that you might find. Smart Pots are sold around the world, and they're proudly made 100% right here in the USA. Smart Pots come in a wide array of sizes and colors and can be reused year after year. Some models even have handles, and that makes them a lot easier to move around the yard. Because the fabric breathes, Smart Pots are better suited than plastic pots, especially for hot climates. That breathable fabric has other benefits too. Water drainage issues? Not with Smart Pots. Roots that go round and round choking the root ball like they do in plastic pots? Doesn't happen with Smart Pots. These benefits will help you get a bigger, better plant than what you've gotten in the past with the same size plastic or other hard container. Smart Pots are available at independent garden centers as well as select Ace and True Value hardware stores nationwide. To find a store near you or to buy online, visit smartpots.com/Fred. And don't forget that /Fred part. On that page are details about how, for a limited time, you can get 10% off your Smart Pot order by using the coupon code FRED. F-R-E-D. Use it at checkout from the Smart Pot store. Visit smartpots.com/Fred for more information about the complete line of Smart Pots lightweight, colorful, award-winning fabric containers. And don't forget that special Farmer Fred 10% discount. Smart Pots, the original award-winning fabric planter. Go to smartpots.com/Fred. Are you thinking of growing fruit trees? Maybe you already are, but you'll want to know more about them. Well, you probably have a million questions, like which fruit trees will grow where I live? What are the tastiest fruits? When's harvest time? How do I care for these trees? The good news is the answers are all nearby. Just go to davewilson.com, click on the Home Garden tab at the top of the page. And in that Home Garden tab, you're going to find a link to their fruit and nut harvest chart so you can be picking delicious, healthy fruits from your own yard for a long growing season. Here in USDA Zone 9, that could be May through December. And you're just a click away with the informative YouTube video series at davewilson.com. As part of that video series, they'll walk you through the simple process of using the Dave Wilson website to find their trees either at a nearby local nursery or at a mail order source. That's Dave Wilson Nursery, the nation's largest grower of fruit trees for the backyard garden. They've got planting tips, taste test results, and information about their revolutionary backyard orchard culture techniques. That'll explain how you can have a cornucopia of different fruit trees in a small backyard. Your harvest to better health begins at davewilson.com. We like to answer your garden questions here on the Garden Basics podcast. We bring in Debbie Flower to help us out. Debbie Flower, retired college horticultural professor. And this one we'll call All Gardening is Local and the Right Plant in the Right Place, Debbie.
All righty.
And this is from Doug, who lives in Auburn, California. Auburn is in our foothills. The altitude there is about 1,500, 2,000 feet, depending on which part of Auburn you live in. And Doug, where you live is kind of a transition zone, I guess, really, depending on which side of Auburn you live on. Are you on the warm side or the cold side? But
a low spot or a high spot, too.
Yeah. So I think we're fairly safe to say Zone 9, USDA Zone 9 for that. But it could be Zone 8.
Or 7, yeah.
And Doug writes in and says, I enjoy your podcast, Growing in Water Troughs, and I'm growing avocado trees. I'm wondering if I can combine growing avocado trees with growing in water troughs. I think I have a good location in my yard for a couple of avocado trees, but it's really close to a couple of water lines from my well to my house. If I plant in the ground on a raised mound, will the avocado tree roots seek the buried water lines? If so, can I plant in a water trough with drain holes in the bottom of the trough? If not that, can I plant in a water trough with no additional drain holes in the bottom of the trough? My wife and I eat avocados all year long. They're really expensive, especially organic avocados. What do you suggest? Move to San Diego, Doug, if you want year-round avocados. Doug, I got a question for you. I know you can't hear me, or you can hear me, but you can't respond. Doug, how many avocado trees are growing in your neighborhood? That would be the first thing I would do. If I move to an area and I get this hankering for growing something that I don't normally grow, I would look around and talk to my neighbors and see if it's growing here.
Where's your sense of adventure, Fred?
I know. And here's a guy that planted avocado trees that were dead in the first year, but I had to try.
Yes, you have to try. And I'm the same way. I have to try.
Yeah.
Yes. So I applaud Doug for wanting to try. And there are some cold-tolerant avocados, typically the Mexican ones, Mexicali, and there are several types of Mexicali. The Stewart, the Zutano, the Bacon, but
Jim.
not the ones... I'm sorry?
Jim.
Oh, Jim.
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 Hi, Jim.
Hi, Jim. Okay. I didn't know about that one.
Yeah.
But not the ones you find in the grocery store. These are typically going to be smaller fruits and thinner skins. So that's one thing to consider. You're not going to get the avocados you're used to eating. As far as planting them in the ground and having them seek out the water line, that's not going to happen.
Yeah, these aren't willow trees.
Well, and roots don't seek water. Roots just grow very well where they're getting water and oxygen. If that pipe has a crack in it and is leaking, then it's creating a wet place, and the roots will grow into it. They will not seek it. It's the pipe's fault. Sorry, but it is.
All right.
So, yes, you can plant them in the ground. Yes, you can plant them in a trough instead. I'm not sure how big they'll get. Avocados can get to be 20 feet tall. They will not get that big in a trough because they don't have the root system that they would have in the ground. And they are not as well insulated. The roots are actually the most sensitive portion of a plant to cold, and they will not be as well insulated in the container. So there may be a little more dieback in the winter. Mexican types of avocados can take about 20 degrees cold. If you get colder than that, you're going to need to add heat in the winter, laying the cloth over the top of the plant, adding the light bulbs, that kind of thing. These avocados also, they have their stems, their trunks typically sunburn. You're going to want to protect those from the light. So put some diluted 1-to-1 latex paint in a light color on the trunk.
Interior latex.
Yes, that's important. If you use exterior, then it'll suffocate the plant. They need wind protection, so that's something to consider.
They also have mysterious moisture requirements in that the soil must be moist but well drained.
Yes.
How do you do that?
In a container, that's where you start adding like lava rock to open it up, something big that's not going to decompose. If you just use container soil, it will decompose. It'll get very tight and it'll hold lots of moisture, and that will kill the plant.
But definitely drain holes.
Drain holes, right. So the water troughs have typically one big drain hole because they're water troughs and you need to be emptied and cleaned.
And it's on the side, though.
And it's on the side. So drilling some extra holes across the bottom would be a thing to do.
Yep. And then raise it off the ground so that trough is not in contact with the ground. And even though the bottom of a trough may have a half-inch clearance from the ground, that's pretty darn close, and soil can build up to it. And if those roots sense that, hey, just outside this hole, there's more soil, let's go.
Right.
You just clogged up your holes.
Right. So you want to lay it up on something higher.
Yeah. So on 2x4s or bricks or something, just to get a little bit more clearance.
I think to try, putting it in the soil is your best bet. Growing in containers is always more difficult, takes more human interaction, more checking. Does it need fertilizer? They're pretty heavy feeders. They're pretty heavy nitrogen feeders, so you have to fertilize them pretty regularly. That's harder. They'll need even more in a container. Check their moisture. Check the temperature of the media, that kind of thing. And then the media breaking down and holding too much moisture is another problem.
I would also suggest that you head to a local nursery, Doug, and ask the nursery people who work there, or the old-timers, ask them, do you know anybody growing avocados up here? If they don't laugh, then go ahead, try it.
Or try it anyway.
Well, yeah.
Just know that it may not work.
Yeah, exactly.
And it'll take several years. If it's successful, it lives through the winter, it'll take several years, 3 to 5 years before you'll get any fruit.
The areas where I have seen avocados growing successfully in marginal climates for avocados, and the Sacramento area is really marginal. It's not a commercial crop here.
No, it's not, and that's an indication that it is marginal.
Yeah. Commercially, avocados grown in California are grown basically along the coast in central and southern California, not much inland, although they are developing varieties for the inland valley. They haven't hit the market yet, and they're going to be tied up in agriculture for a while before they get to the home market. But down the road, I could see a cold-tolerant, heat-tolerant avocado plant for a wider area, and that's coming down the pike. But
so you're saying that they're growing where the climate is very mild. Winters are warm and summers are cool. There's humidity. There's not much change from day to day.
It's where it very seldom gets above 90 during the day in the summertime. Very seldom drops below 40 in the wintertime. Mm-hmm. And where I have seen avocado trees grown successfully in marginal climates, they have, like you mentioned, a lot of buffering situations around them. Usually they're near a west or south-facing wall. They're on or near a concrete patio that reflects heat back up into it in the wintertime. And there's some sort of windbreak, too, to protect them from dry winds, especially. And you may want to grow more than one variety to help in pollination, although that is in dispute now.
It is, yeah.
Because I've talked with commercial growers who say, listen, if you're trying to grow an avocado tree where you live, it's going to be so stressed. It's going to put out both the A flower and the B flower that it needs for effective pollination. Mm-hmm. Well, go ahead, try, whatever.
Try and let us know.
Yeah. But, drop by the nursery. Go to Isley's nursery there in Auburn, Doug, and talk to them.
Which is now Green Acres.
I don't know what the official name of it is now.
Isley by Green Acres, maybe, something like
along those lines. But talk to the Isleys.
Yes, talk to the Isleys. They're not very knowledgeable people.
Yes, and see if they bite their tongue. All right, Doug. Good luck with that, Debbie. Thanks for the avocado info.
My pleasure.
In the September 29th, 2023 edition of the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter and podcast, we talk about growing America's most consumed vegetable, the potato. We cover how to choose, prepare, and plant your favorite potato variety. And we have a list of the most nutritious, colorful, and tasty potatoes that you can grow. So add some variety to your potato eating pleasures. Check out the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter and podcast. If you're already a subscriber, it's probably in your email waiting for you right now. Or you can start a subscription. It's free. Find the link to the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter and podcast in today's show notes or on the Substack app. And you can sign up at the newsletter link at our homepage, gardenbasics.net. In last week's podcast, we talked about caring for your vermicomposting system during the fall and winter. That has a lot of useful information about the caring and feeding of your worms, who are responsible for paying you back with one of the best soil amendments around, worm castings. But let's take a step back, shall we? How do you set up a successful vermicomposting system? Today's flashback episode of the week answers that question. It's episode 138 from September of 2021, entitled Worm Bin Basics. Plus, we talk with Master Gardener Catherine Barquette about tasty grape varieties to grow, both table grapes and wine grapes, and some of them are over 100 years old. Give it a listen. It's episode 138 from September of 2021, Worm Bin Basics and Grape Varieties Worth a Try. Find a link to it in today's show notes or at the podcast player of your choice. And you can find it at our homepage, gardenbasics.net. The Garden Basics with Farmer Fred podcast comes out once a week on Fridays. Plus, the newsletter podcast that comes with the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter continues, and that will also be released on Fridays. Both are free, and they're brought to you by Smart Pots and Dave Wilson Nursery. The Garden Basics podcast is available wherever podcasts are handed out, and that includes our homepage, gardenbasics.net. And that's where you can also sign up for the Beyond the Garden Basics newsletter and podcast. That's gardenbasics.net. Or you can use the links in today's show notes. And thank you so much for listening.